Hello there. I'm Adele reviewing 1967's You Only Live Twice. The first memory that I have of seeing a movie in a theater is this. Long before Harry Potter, the MCU or the DCEU, long before Star Wars or Star Trek, The Fast and the Furious, or even the Dark Universe, there was
Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Was Bond the first series? No. Hollywood had been making serials since at least the 30s with Buck Rogers and the Flash Gordon, among others. But it might be considered one of the longest-running successful series. And Diamonds Are Forever was my gateway into the Bond universe. By the late 70s, ABC Television would have a Bond Summer Movie Festival in which they would show a different Bond movie each Sunday all through the summer. At that time, that meant I got to see all the Connery movies, the Lazenby one, and a pair of Moores. To this day, Connery is my favorite. No doubt because I grew up on his series of films. I do like all of the Bonds so far, but I feel that Connery had the best movies. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Bond series of movies, there have been 6 actors to play James Bond in the official series of movies: Sean Connery, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig. And as I said, my favorite is Connery. I think he had the most grounded Bond. Most of his films felt like they could be in the realm of possibility, that they could have actually happened. And then there is You Only Live Twice. This was the beginning of overtop spectacle for the Bond movies. Now don't get me wrong, I like spectacle as much as the next person, but spectacle really seems to have a very short lifespan. If there isn't a decent story to pull you in and hold your interest, spectacle can quickly become noise. Still, you can get away with spectacle for quite a while before it gets old. So let's go back in time to when spectacle was still young and fresh, at least for the Bond films. Our movie opens in space with an American capsule in orbit. One of the astronauts goes outside to test his EVA equipment. As he is doing this, a UFO appears on the radar screens of a tracking station in Hawaii. It is an unknown ship that closes quickly on the capsule and then swallows it, killing the astronaut. Whoa. Meanwhile, our hero Bond is in Hong Kong to follow up on British intelligence, which says that the mystery ship landed somewhere in the Sea of Japan area. His interrogation of his contact goes horribly wrong. After the title song and credits, we see Bond's funeral. Once his body is committed to the sea, we then see a pair of divers retrieve the body and return it to a submerged submarine. Turns out it was all a ruse to shake off Bond's enemies so that he could investigate without having them running any interference. Because this is a real problem. America is not happy and threatening war with the Soviet Union over the missing capsule. M fills Bond in on the mission specs. They think the mystery rocket landed somewhere in Japan, but they can find no trace of it. It's his job to find out what happened before the Soviets and the Americans launch another pair of capsules. The sub then travels to somewhere offshore of Japan, and Bond sneaks into the country. He makes his way to a sumo arena where he is to meet his contact. Turns out it is an attractive lady. In a Bond film, what are the odds? This lady takes him to his real contact, Mr. Henderson. He is a British expatriate with ties to the Japanese intelligence community. He tells Bond the most important contact he has is the head of the Japanese Secret Service, Tanaka. Henderson is sure the rocket is somewhere in Japan, and it belongs to a major world power, and it also involves a major Japanese conglomeration. But he is killed before he can name them. Bond kills the assassin and sees that there is a getaway car waiting. So he takes the guy's COVID mask, hat, and coat, and pretends to be the assassin and that he is injured. The driver takes him to the Osato Chemicals headquarters and up to a large office. There it is discovered that Bond is not the assassin, so we have a fight with the driver. As an interesting side note, the driver is played by a professional wrestler by the name of Peter Fani Maivia, grandfather of another wrestler turned actor, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Admittedly, this is a rather ham-handed way of putting Bond onto the trail of our villains. After all, he is supposed to be wounded, and rather than going to the hideout or an underground clinic for help, they head to the boss's office at his legitimate business. This, of course, is so that Bond will be on the trail of the Japanese conglomeration. But a more believable way to get there is to have the driver take him back to their hideout and then have Bond beat the information out of him. Oh well. But this was the first script that Roald Dahl had ever written, and he had only had 6 weeks to do it in. So Bond kills the driver and then tries to break into a safe, but he sets off an alarm. He grabs some papers and then he hot-foots it out of there, security guards in pursuit. As he flees the building, he is rescued by Aki, the girl who picked him up at the sumo stadium earlier. She takes Bond to her real boss, Tanaka. Tanaka is happy to meet Bond, and Bond shares the papers that he retrieved from Osato's safe. It is a ship's manifest, and one of the items listed is LOX, which Bond says could be liquid oxygen, something that is used in rocket fuel. Tanaka is spurred to action by this, and they make their way to his private subway train for transport. While riding in it, Tanaka's men have been examining the papers and photo. They show a slide of the image for Tanaka and Bond to see. It is a large shipping vessel called the Ningpo in a harbor. There's a message with it saying that the picture was taken by an American tourist who has since been killed as a precaution. They ID the ship, and Tanaka orders his minions to find out as much about it as they can. They eventually arrive at Tanaka's house, and Bond gets to...
My friend, now you take your first civilized bath.
Really? Well, I like the plumbing.
Oh, yeah.
Bond also asks Tanaka to arrange a meeting with Osato. The next day, Bond gets his meeting with Osato. It's all some perfunctory stuff about Bond working for a company that wants to buy chemicals from Osato. Osato, for his part, has an X-ray machine in his desk, and he sees that Bond is armed. After they conclude their meeting, Osato tells his secretary, Miss Brandt, to have Bond killed. Lacking any sense of subtlety, a car with gunmen drives up behind Bond as he's leaving the building and is about to open fire when Aki pulls up and shouts a warning. It does result in a fairly decent chase, and one of the more original ends to it as well. Talking over their video phone, Tanaka says that Osato owns the Ningpo, and that it is being loaded at the Kobe harbor and will be leaving later in the afternoon. He recommends that Bond check it out. Bond and Aki then head for Kobe. Once they arrive at the docks, they confirm that the ship is being loaded with liquid oxygen, although the canisters read synthetic turpentine. The longshoremen don't like Bond snooping around and try to rough him up. Bond has Aki make a break for it while he leads the longshoremen on a merry chase. Bond eventually gets cold-cocked by one of them and is taken to number 11, who turns out to be Miss Brandt. She threatens him, and he admits to being an industrial spy. He offers Miss Brandt a bribe, and she accepts it. In a pointless scene, other than to allow Bond to escape, Miss Brandt is flying him back to Tokyo and bails out in the hopes that it will appear that he died in an accidental crash. Now up to this point, they haven't been too concerned with subtlety. I suppose you have to start sometime. Bond manages to break free of his bonds and get control of the plane in time to make a rough landing. Later, Bond is back at Tanaka's home, and Tanaka informs him that they have identified the coastline. It is an island between Shanghai and Kobe. Pictures of the Ningpo show that it unloaded its cargo during the night that it was at the island. Bond says they need to examine the island and asks if the equipment he asked for has arrived from England. Tanaka says yes, and we are introduced to Q and one of my favorite Bond gadgets ever, Little Nelly. Little Nelly is an ultralight helicopter for one, and this being Bond, it is well armed. Bond takes flight for the island and checks out the surrounding area of the harbor that the Ningpo had been at. There is a small fishing village and dormant volcano. Shortly after he flies over the volcano, 4 helicopters arrive and attack him. Now it's time to see what Little Nelly can do.
Excellent!
Next up, the Russians launch their space capsule. And like the Americans, it is captured. Only this time we follow the mystery rocket as it returns to Earth. It lands at a secret base hidden in a volcano. This is the beginning of the overtop spectacle that many Bond movies have come to bask in. Now several questions jump to mind. The first being, how did something like this get built without anybody noticing? I mean, there would have been an endless stream of trucks hauling in steel, concrete, rebar, stuff like that. Not to mention all the excavators, cranes, all sorts of equipment needed to build such a complex. And there's the matter of the noise and the light of the rocket as it takes off and lands. Sure, this is a remote Japanese island, but as we have seen, there is a fishing village located nearby. Anyways, the rocket lands and the Russian capsule is removed from it. The astronauts are taken into custody, and we learn that Spectre is behind this. Not only that, but they have been hired by an unnamed Asian power to start a war between the United States and the Soviet Union. We cut back to see Bond arriving at the training facility that Tanaka has set up to train agents to be ninjas. The plan is that Bond is going to get some ninja training, some cosmetic surgery to make him appear more Japanese, and then he's going to marry a girl from the island to help blend in on the island. So we get a quick montage of Bond training in martial arts up to the point that someone tries to kill him. In a surprising move considering that Spectre knows that Bond is alive and training at Tanaka's, and now appears to be Japanese, they continue with the plan.
What?
They have a nice ceremonial marriage to a local girl who's an agent of Tanaka's by the name of Kissy, and Bond tries to blend in. In a weird bit of news, one of the island's diving girls is found dead after having sailed into a nearby shoreline cave. Bond asks Kissy to lead him there in the morning to investigate. The morning comes and they head out for the cave. Once inside, Bond smells gas and they dive into the water to swim out. They make it to shore and realize that the cave is an outlet for a volcano. Bond says they need to make a quick trip up the volcano to examine the crater. They get near the top and stop to take a breather. A helicopter flies overhead and drops down into the crater. By the time they make their way to the top, there's no sign of the helicopter. I have to admit, with as close as the helicopter flew by, I'm surprised that Bond wasn't seen or that security was not sent to get them. By the time Bond and Kissy make their way down to the water in the crater, night has come. They quickly discover that all is not as it seems. Fortunately for Bond, the lake begins to open as the helicopter is preparing to leave. Bond tells Kissy to go get Tanaka and all the men he can. Meanwhile, he's going to sneak into the base. While that is going on, the Americans launch their capsule. Bond makes his way into the base and frees the captured astronauts. Meanwhile, Kissy is swimming back to the village and a helicopter somehow manages to spot her swimming in the dark when they couldn't see her and Bond making out in the grass earlier.
No way.
Back in the base, Bond and a pair of astronauts have disguised themselves as security personnel, and they go over to one of the Spectre astronauts' prep rooms and jump him. Bond then gets into the astronaut suit. The order comes down. The astronauts are called to the rocket to prepare for launch. Bond almost gets into the rocket when the unseen head of Spectre has them stop Bond and bring Bond to him. Once Bond is before him, he introduces himself. He is Ernst Stavro Blofeld, and he is nice enough to let Bond know what he did wrong.
You made a mistake, my friend. No astronaut would enter the capsule carrying his air conditioner.
Once the reserve astronaut is loaded, they launch the rocket to intercept the American capsule. One smart detail they added, the rocket now has a Soviet insignia on it. Why they didn't have it on earlier is a mystery except for when you realize that the point of the movie is for Bond to foil the plot to start World War III, not for Spectre to win. Spectre launches the world's slowest rocket, and Tanaka and his ninja army arrive. As they make their way into the crater, they are seen on security cameras that somehow missed Bond and Kissy earlier in the brightness of day. Not only that, but they have placed automatic machine gun nests around the crater for defense, and they open fire. And you know what that means.
Game on! Game on!
Blofeld gloats a bit, and Bond makes a last request. Blofeld stupidly grants it, and Bond is able to open the crater access. A number of ninjas come pouring into the complex, but are quickly dealt with by the base security, and Bond is overpowered and the complex's roof is closed again. However, a lone ninja managed to get into the superstructure and places an explosive against the roof. It blows a large hole in the roof, and more ninjas come pouring in. A huge battle takes place, and Tanaka's men slowly make inroads into the complex. Sensing the change in their fortunes, Blofeld is about to execute Bond and flee, but is stopped by Tanaka. Bond tells Tanaka that there's a self-destruct button in the control room to destroy the rocket. After a number of struggles, Bond makes it to the control room and presses the destruct button, blowing up the rocket. War is averted.
Excellent!
Blofeld shows up and activates the base's self-destruct sequence.
Bogus!
Bond, Tanaka, Kissy, and the ninja army flee out of the cave tunnel as the explosions cause the volcano to become active. Strangely enough, the tunnel isn't filled with lava or superheated steam. A couple cargo transport planes fly overhead and drop rafts for our heroes now that they are somehow far out to the sea. Bond and Kissy manage to get to a raft by themselves and watch the volcano erupt in the distance. Bond starts a makeout session with Kissy when the submarine with M arrives to rescue them. The end. And there you have it. You only live twice. A flawed movie to be sure, but I love it. The premise is ludicrous. Inciting World War III so that the USA and Soviet Union will destroy themselves and allow an unnamed Asian power to ascend to prominence is silly because at the time it was believed that both countries had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world several times over. And once the nukes start flying, neither side is going to want to be caught with missiles in their silos as their enemy missiles come raining down around them. Also, Follett doesn't care about borders. But if you can overlook that, this movie does set the stakes higher than they've ever previously been in a Bond film. This film came out during the height of the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union, and tensions were still high post-Cuban Missile Crisis. This movie plays into those tensions quite well. Most of the story takes place in Japan and is very interesting to see a glimpse of their culture at that time. And I do like the design of Spectre's volcano lair, absurd as it is. For the most part, it's all played and taken seriously, and for me, that's why the movie works. It was directed by Louis Gilbert, best known for Sink the Bismarck, Alfie, and the Bond movies You Only Live Twice, The Spy Who Loved Me, and Moonraker. It was written by Roald Dahl, best known as an author of children's books such as James and the Giant Peach and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. But on the screenplay side, he is known for You Only Live Twice, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and The Night Digger. It starred Sean Connery, Tetsuo Tanba, Mie Hama, Akiko Wakabayashi, Teru Shimada, Karen Doer, and Donald Pleasance. They all do a fine job. It was rated PG for mild violence and gunplay. While there is a bunch of it, it isn't very graphic. It has a runtime of 1 hour and 57 minutes. A few times you feel the length, but they were going for spectacle, and that can eat up the clock. It had a budget of $9.5 million, but it made $111.6 million, so it made money. IMDb has it at 6.8 out of 10, Metacritic has it at 61 out of 100, and Rotten Tomatoes has it at 74% per critics and 69% per audience score. These are all fair, I believe, but I'd give it about a 7.5 out of 10 myself. Yeah, it has its issues, but I still love it. Anyways, I say check it out. As always, thanks for watching. Until next time.
It's one small step for man.
Now cut that!